All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Passion in Motion podcast. It's your host, Mutsa. That's me. And today I am joined by a very special guest, Deveney Wells-Gibson, who is a lawyer. And today's conversation is going to be about prenups and all things marriage and stuff. So it's going to be exciting. But anyway, I want to take this opportunity to pass it on to you, Deveney, to kind of say hello to the people out here and also just speak a little bit about yourself. So over to you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Mutsa. My name is Deveney Wells-Gibson. I am a family law attorney in San Diego, California. And that means we primarily do things such as divorce, custody battles, domestic violence restraining orders, property division. And so through my time doing family law, I see one end of a relationship being the dissolution of it, so the divorce.
Yeah.
And I personally have become very jaded when it comes to relationships because of what I'm seeing from all of my clients, from what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I am witnessing. It has definitely changed my perspective on relationships because I'm in the dating scene, right? And so it just gives me more perspective on things I should be concerned about, things I should be aware of when it comes time to finding like my forever person.
Yeah.
So with that is where I've created the prenup queen. So that's why I use prenups, even though there's a negative connotation with them, which we will obviously talk about, but which is why I use prenups to foster certain types of conversations with people before they say I do. So really, I use prenups as a means to strengthen marriages and lower the divorce rate because now we're going to encourage certain types of discussions so that way both people are on the same page. So that's where I've created the prenup queen. That has been my journey with the prenup queen. And that is why I am just so pro prenup. And I will say that I like doing prenups because everything that I do, whether it's through the prenup queen or with my firm, Wells-Gibson Family Law, where we focus on divorces, everything that I have done has always been for the benefit of the child. So I am a product of divorce. I'm a child of divorce, I should say. My parents divorced when I was very young. I watched my mom work 3 jobs to make ends meet while my dad was living the life. And I just wish, had she had someone who advocated strongly for her, it would have been like a better trickle down effect to me, the child. And so that's also where in prenups, I really want to make sure I'm protecting really, obviously, my client, but both people have to be protected. A prenup has to be fair. And with a fair division of, if there's a divorce, division of assets, income, that ensures that the child's also going to be in a better place, in a better state, because then the custodial parent or maybe both parents are financially more stable. So everything has come back to the child. But at the end of the day, I serve whoever my client is.
I love that. That's so interesting. There's, you know what? There's a lot you said there that was making my mind go ding ding. There's just so many things I feel like we could talk about, but I'll end up having you here for hours because
Prenups can actually be they can be complicated if they're it's almost like an estate plan but not. But there's so many things we can talk about in a prenup that it can become really complex depending on the complexity that the client needs, or it can be
yeah,
very basic. So it's there's a lot to a prenup.
there's a lot. Yeah, even just besides prenups, just even things that you're talking about personally about how you've become jaded in the dating world and just what you've seen. You know, if we have time, maybe we'll unpack that a little bit. I'll be very curious to hear kind of like what you've seen, the things that you've thought about, and all that. But you know what? So we're talking about prenups as if everybody knows what a prenup is. So let's just start at the very, very beginning. What exactly is a prenup?
So the way society views a prenup is it is a document that people, or an agreement that people make. I say people, that future spouses make when they are anticipating or they're trying to figure out how things are going to get divided upon divorce. So people already make the assumption then that means you're thinking your marriage is going to fail, so you're wanting to protect it. But a prenup in and of itself is an agreement between partner A, partner B, husband and wife, spouse, future spouses, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Me saying husband and wife, that's me obviously thinking of heterosexual relationships. So spouse, future spouse one, future spouse two,
Okay.
fiancés.
Yes.
Um, but it's just an agreement. And all that really goes in there are things such as assets and debts. It's really all about finances. It's really all about assets. It's really all about um, the monetary type of things. So, like, nothing concerning child custody or visitation can be in there, but I still think of things such as if someone's going to be a stay at home parent, how are we now going to finagle this prenup to best protect them?
Mm.
So, even though I say everything I do is for the interest of the children, and we can't necessarily put custody or visitation in a prenup, I'm still thinking about what like their overall goals and dreams are that the two individuals are trying to do or accomplish, and I base the prenup off of that. So a prenup, most people think of prenup as in figuring out how things are going to get dispersed upon divorce, but
Mm-hmm.
a prenup can also be a terrific start to an estate plan. So a prenup in and of itself is not an estate plan. You still need to do a trust or a will or so on and so forth. But most people end up needing a prenup depending on what they're trying to do with their estate plan. So each state has very different laws. So, like here in California, we are a community property state, meaning anything that people receive during the marriage is presumed community property. So, when people say that's our money, that is
Mm.
very accurate. So if someone makes an income from their employment, that is the community's money. It's not just the person who earned that money's like funds. It is community money. So where people end up going wrong is thinking, well, that's my money. So whatever I do with it is mine, and that is incorrect. But you can make that happen if you have a prenup. So a prenup allows for you to change the state's laws. So, for example, say I start this business during the marriage and I want that business to remain my separate property. And say I have a kid from another relationship and I want that kid from that other relationship to inherit this business that I've created during the marriage. I will have to have a prenup. So in order to even make that happen, I will have to have a prenup that says
Oh.
this business is not a community business. It is now my separate property. And now that it's my separate property, I can now go get an estate plan to put it in a separate trust for that to be dispersed to that kid from the other relationship. Absent a prenup, that's not happening because here in California, if I pass away, anything that is community, my husband will automatically take. So that is why I'm yeah, that is why I'm very passionate about prenups because there's so many minute details that you would never know. And so a prenup might be necessary for an estate plan. A
How many
prenup is
states do have that community thing? Just I'm out of curiosity. Like,
mm,
I've actually never heard about this before, so I'm
I
curious.
bel here in the
In the
US, I
U.S.,
believe
yeah.
it's I want to say 13. I want to say there's only 13 states where it's community property, and the rest of the states do something called equitable distribution, meaning that it's not an automatic 50-50 split. So in community property states, it's an automatic 50-50 for anything that's community. In
Mm.
equitable distribution states, the court's going to try to figure out what's fair and make a split off of fairness. So you have community property states, equitable distribution states.
Interesting. I had no idea there was even that that difference between different states. So I assume that there are pros and cons to both.
Yes.
Which of the two do you feel like works better?
I don't practice in an equitable distribution state, but from what I've seen, I think equitable distribution. Yeah, I would say equitable distribution is is more fair, but that means you have to put on a good showing to the court on why it would be fair.
Mm,
Absent that, you're kind of just at the court's mercy on what the court believes to be fair, which that would be the downside. The the good thing about community property states is it's 50-50. Like you just
yeah.
know it's an equal split, that it is what it is. The downside is 50-50 doesn't always mean equitable, though, because it's also 50% of the debts. So, say, for example, one spouse is a stay at home parent and has been a stay at home parent for God knows how long, and the other spouse makes $200,000 a year, and you're splitting the debts 50-50. That is way more burdensome to the stay at home parent than it would be the person who can afford the debt. So a 50-50 split isn't always equitable, isn't always fair.
Oh wow. So in the equitable states, debt, if it is it more like, do spouses then share debt in those states, or is it like your debt, you keep your debt, and if this person has this debt, that's your, like, how does debt work in equitable states?
In equitable distribution states, it's whatever's going to be deemed equitable.
Okay.
So, and when I say whatever's deemed, it's whatever the court finds to
Okay.
be fair. So it really depends. It really depends. But primarily speaking, anything that you have prior to the marriage would be considered separate property, anyways. So, if you were to accumulate something during the marriage, even if it's in one spouse's name alone, at least in the community property state, even if it's in one spouse's name alone, it doesn't mean it's their separate debt or property. If
Hmm.
anything that you do during the marriage, it is community in a community
Interesting.
property state. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you know what? Whenever we hear about prenups, because this is day to day life. This is what affects every person. But when we've heard about prenups, or the first time I heard about prenups, I don't want to make a generalization, but I feel like it's pretty general. Whenever we hear about prenups, is when, like, let's say Kanye West is serving Kim Kardashian a prenup, right?
Uh-huh.
Or it's like when it's usually like megastars or celebrities or people who have like lots and lots of money who say, "Hey, I need to protect what I got, so prenup." Or people like they have a huge divorce and it's like, oh, this person, even though they're like the owner of this mega business, had to give up so much money to this other person because there was no prenup in place. So that's the only time we've heard about them. So for the daily
Mhm.
person, it's like, why would I ever need a prenup? That, I think that's kind of where the misconceptions start, because the
Yeah.
ways in which they've been used has been, oh, this person wants to take 50% or however many millions from this person. So I kind of have this question of, with prenups, so do you, how much, what do you have to own? Like, let's say you're just a regular person, you work a regular job, I rent, and my partner does the same. I don't have much. Neither does she. When you
Mhm.
sign a prenup, you don't really have assets. So, or there's really nothing that you can, so is a prenup necessary in those situations? But then, as
Mm.
we've talked about, like debt and stuff, it makes sense. But I'm just kind of curious for people who say, I don't even have much anyways. You don't have much anyways. So why do we have to sign a prenup?
Right. Okay. There's a lot to unpack here. So to answer your question, I will always be of the mindset that everyone needs a prenup. I don't care if you're dirt poor, broke, got nothing, or if you are the richest man in the world.
Mm,
If anything, the richest people in the world, if they lose half their stuff, they will still be extremely wealthy. Okay,
yeah.
it will not impact them as much as it impacts people who don't have a lot of money. And so, even though we only see prenups with the mega wealthy or the people who think they have a lot more to protect, it's really the people, it's the modern everyday people who need it the most, because we will be the most impacted from a divorce. A divorce is one of the leading causes of bankruptcy because
Mm,
of the way it impacts us. It's such a financial hit and such a financial setback to be divorced. And so the average cost of divorce in the US, the average cost of a divorce is roughly $17,000. And I know the
wow.
average person does not have $17,000 sitting around to get divorced.
Why does it
Um,
cost that much? Is it just lawyer fees? Like, why does it cost that much? Wow.
lawyer fees. And I'm big on, like, we've created at the firm a DIY, divorce it yourself course. Not every divorce needs an attorney,
Mm.
but what I will say keeps attorneys in business is the emotions that both spouses are riding on. It's the resentment, it's the spitefulness, it's the I want the other person to suffer. And that's
Mm.
what's keeping us in business. And so that's also why I'm big on prenups. Like, we've already handled this. This is what we agreed to when we were back in love and what we thought would be fair when we loved each other. Because
Mm-hmm.
the person you marry is not the same person you are divorcing. So it's, in my opinion, it's best to think about possibilities ahead of time, make agreements while we're in a good mental, emotional state, when we don't hate the other person. So that way, if the marriage ends up dissolving, if the marriage ends up not being the right relationship, it's an easy split. It's an easy move. We're not spending $17,000 to divorce. Like, we can do so many better things with that money, especially if we have children. But
Ah, wait. So
um,
prenups save you from divorce fees, essentially. Like if you sign a prenup, you're saving yourself money later down the line. Wow, I never realized that. That's a major benefit.
yeah,
Wow.
the
Okay.
cost of a divorce, I'm sorry, the cost of a prenup is not nearly as much as the cost of a divorce. So I've seen prenups for as cheap as like $1,250, $1,250, especially if you're doing like an online program where you can just plug and play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've also seen prenups as expensive as like $25,000, but that's for people who have like a lot to protect, right? So it's a lot more complex. So it just depends. But when people ask me, do I even need a prenup because we don't have anything? My answer will always be yes, because my hope, my thought is you're not going to be in a situation where you're always broke. My hope is
Mm.
everyone's, trying to create, be bigger and better, whatever the case may be. Everyone will eventually, not everyone, but the thought is you'll eventually start like investing, having like retirement funds, things of that nature. And those are especially important for the average everyday person to protect. Because imagine getting to 50, 55 years old, thinking you're going to retire in the next 10 years, only for your retirement account to be split because your retirement account is community if you've been putting into it during the marriage. So your thoughts on retiring, gone out the window
Wow.
because now your retirement's split in half. So that's something that we also talk about. Granted, I don't necessarily think splitting a retirement is unfair, especially if um, only one spouse is working, right?
Mm.
So those are things that we talk about ahead of time. I always say, is there any plans on someone being a stay-at-home parent or a stay-at-home spouse, a stay-at-home anything? Because now we have to think about there's only going to be one retirement account. There's likely only going to be one income. Where's that going? And we have to plan for these things. So it's the people, it's us, modern everyday people, who especially need a prenup because we will be the most impacted if we were to divorce.
Wow, that's so interesting. I really never thought that. And again, like it feeds into that thing about you only see prenups in certain situations and nobody day to day talks about it. Like
Yeah.
nobody tries to say, okay, this is why we need to have a prenup or just to protect ourselves from, debt if it comes later or, retirement funds and stuff. Like, as you're saying, it can actually, I didn't know that it affected so many different facets of your life that you might take for granted if you didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So with prenups, when you were talking earlier about, for example, the stay-at-home spouse, right? And people get divorced usually, and it's usually the stay-at-home spouse that gets the most impacted,
Hmm.
because maybe they're not been in the workforce and all that stuff. Is it possible for a prenup to involve families? Like, okay, if we ever do get divorced, your I don't know, like familial support in some way. I don't know. Like I was just kind of curious if like there's a way to say, okay, you'll be protected in some way since you are a stay-at-home spouse by either my family or your. I don't know. Can you bring families together for this? I don't know.
No, because a prenup it's just a contract. That's all it is. It's just a
Okay.
contract and agreement between two people. So you can't contract other people to do things into
I
it because
see.
they're not. It's like, I didn't agree to that. I didn't agree to support this person. Like, I don't know why y'all brought us into it. Um, so not necessarily that wouldn't work.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's always unfortunate when the person who does take a lot of work at home like doesn't end up with much during like a prenup and stuff. So, okay.
Mhm.
I guess we've talked about a lot of this. So, in terms of how you come up with things, like you're sitting next to a lawyer and you're talking about, okay, this is a what's your process? Like if a new couple comes to, or like a couple that is to be married and say, all right, we want to put together a prenup. What are kind of like the conversations that you have with with this couple, and like how
Mhm.
long is the process? Like how many conversations do you need to have? It doesn't sound like it's a we sit for one day and we figure it out. It sounds like it does require some thinking and
Mhm.
some a lot of reflection, a lot of like
Right.
looking into this and this and that. So what does that typically look like when two people say, okay, want to get married, prenup? What's your process of walking those people through it?
It depends. So, I've been in situations where they've already had a discussion about prenups and they come into my office and they know exactly what they want.
Okay.
I'll ask the question and they have an answer. Like, it's immediate. There are other situations where I try to have conversations with them and it's maybe something they haven't yet thought about, or it's maybe something they would like some legal advice on. And they're like, well, what do you normally see? And then I try to guide them. I can't tell them what to do, but I can guide them, give them advice. And then I've had situations where, for example, one fiance comes in, brings in the other fiance, didn't really tell them much, and they're finding out for the first time in my office. So,
Wow.
which I would never recommend. I would never recommend. So it depends. I would say the quickest I've been able to churn out a prenup has probably been around 3 weeks. And that's
Oh.
because they know exactly what they want. I send them the questionnaire. They fill out the questionnaire. We have to do financial disclosures, meaning both people have to say, this is how much money I have. These are all the assets I have. These are all the debts that I have.
Hmm.
So that way, both people can make informed decisions when it comes to um, signing this prenuptial agreement. So we've been able to move super quick. The longest I've done a prenup has been for about like 7 months because
Wow.
there was just a lot of back and forth, more so on taxes. There's an issue with taxes, but there was just a lot of back and forth, a lot of negotiating, and that just really slowed down the process. So it could be quick, it could be slow. It really just depends. And I will say on the one that took a really long time, I was representing the man, and wife also had representation. And so, really, it was just communications between the attorneys, which is also not necessarily the best,
Mm.
um, because these are people's lives, right? They should be able to communicate on their own. And so, I usually would tell my client, look, this is what her attorney said. Go talk to wifey, future wifey. Go talk to her first, then come back and tell. Like, they have to they have to talk about it because they're going to be the ones living in that marriage, and they have to be on the same page. So,
That's so
that.
interesting. I didn't even know that people can have separate prenup lawyers. I thought you
Mhm.
just go to one person who says, "Okay, this is what we're." Okay, fascinating.
Yeah, because I
Wow.
can only legally represent one person. And so the other person
Oh.
ends up being unrepresented. So here in California, and pretty much all of the US, because we all the US follows the same it's called the premarital act.
Hmm.
So uniform act. So that means it is uniform across all states here in the US. So the only time an attorney is absolutely mandatory is when we start to talk about spousal support. So if anyone
Hmm.
wants to waive their spousal support, or if anyone wants to make modifications to what the law provides for spousal support, there has to be attorneys. And so, because that's such a big right to just give up or to
Hmm.
change or to modify, um, so attorneys are absolutely mandatory. But absent a provision on spousal support, you don't need an attorney. I would say obviously have one to review it because if
Yeah.
your prenup is done incorrectly, there are like certain financial disclosures that have to happen. There's a 7-day waiting period that has to happen. And if your prenup is not done right, it is invalid. And then you've done all
Oh.
that for it to not even be useful.
In what ways can a prenup not be done right?
So like the financial disclosures. So
Okay.
in order for someone to even come into a contract, they need to be informed of what they're giving up.
Okay.
So if it turns out someone actually had millions of dollars in assets, but said they waive like any type of rights to those, they need to be informed. They need to know.
Mm.
Or there's a 7-day waiting period. So after the prenup is completely finalized, both parties are to receive a copy. Then they have 7 days to think about it. You cannot sign a prenup the minute it is finalized. There has to be a 7 day
Oh.
waiting period so they
Okay.
can think about it, go get counsel, talk through it with their attorneys, talk through it with financial advisors, CPAs, whatever the case may be. So that way, when they sign it, they've had enough time to comprehend, understand, and be advised of all their rights.
Interesting. Okay. So how easy is it, given all these due processes, to amend a prenup once you signed it? Like what's the process after that for, if for people who say, okay, we signed this in the beginning, but things have changed. We've had more conversations, or whatever the case, and want to amend it. What
Mhm.
what's the process like that for that?
Very, very easy, and it's pretty much like amending or making changes or modifying like an estate plan. So
Okay.
I would honestly say, if anything, spouses should probably do like a yearly check-in anyways, because things are going to
Hmm.
change. And then to modify, it would now be like a post-nup at that point, but to modify it as circumstances arise. So maybe y'all never decided to have children, but now y'all do. Maybe someone adopted a kid because maybe someone else passed and now they're taking in another minor. So like these are things that happen fairly often and they should be reflected in the agreement that's going to govern their marriage. So I would say do it pretty much yearly, just like a little check-in, see if there's little modifications. But it's just drafting a new one or just drafting an amendment to it and slapping it on the back and
Okay.
saying this provision will now supersede provision A in the prenup.
Hmm. Okay. No, that sounds good. And do prenups cover death, like the death of a spouse? How's that usually um put
Handled.
in a prenup? I'm just curious, like if it covers that.
It wouldn't. So that's when you would need that estate plan. So an estate plan takes care
Okay.
of the death of either spouse, and it depends on what your state says. So when you say, how does it affect death? In a prenup, you can say you waive certain things. You waive being a beneficiary on these things. But if you're wondering how assets are going to be or how they're going to be given,
Yeah.
that's going to be in probate court, which you would need an estate planning attorney
Okay.
for that. The prenup is only used to decide what's separate property and what's community property, or what's separate property and what's marital property if you're living in an equitable distribution state. So that way you can then give that prenup to your estate planning attorney to be able to now move things around the correct way with your estate planning attorney.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I am learning a lot today. Wow, like this is really helpful. So,
Mhm.
what are some of the other big misconceptions that you've come across when it comes to prenups and meeting with people? Like, what's something that always comes across you? I'm like, wow, I wish more people knew about this about prenups. So, like, I wish this wasn't out there about prenups. But yeah, what's something else that you say people should, well, we should demystify about prenups?
That it doesn't mean you're thinking about divorce. I think that is the biggest misconception. I think a lot of people do want to plan just in case, but I just think that a prenup is more than that. I believe a prenup can and should be used instead to strengthen your marriage, to
Hmm.
lower the divorce rate, because as I mentioned earlier, you have those financial disclosures. People will get into a marriage without understanding how much debt their partner actually has, without understanding what kind of assets their partner actually has, without understanding um, their partners, like how their partner views money, how their partner deals with money. And that's super important because finances end up being one of the leading causes of divorce. Financial incompatibilities is the biggest issue that a lot of married couples face. And so having these discussions, and that's I call my process for the prenups, I call my process, it's financial premarital counseling. And
Mm,
so we do have discussions on who's going to manage accounts, what's the expectation, are we doing joint accounts, separate accounts, if it's a joint account, like who's putting what in there. So it's like having these discussions that people fail to have. They just do it as a, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Like that's a lot of
yeah.
people's mentality when it comes to money. And it's like, or how about we just discuss it proactively so that way when the time comes to cross that bridge, y'all already have a game plan. And then y'all aren't stuck at like a standstill because y'all have two different viewpoints, you know? So having those conversations early, I will say I ran into an issue just to give I wouldn't say this is very common, but I ran into an issue where I had a couple come in, and one of my questions that I ask is, well, what are there any plans for someone to be a stay-at-home parent? And the guy said, no, I don't want kids. And the woman said, oh, wait, I want like two kids. And he was so adamant on not wanting children. And I'm
Mm,
just like, y'all are on very different terms
not
and
compatible.
incompatible. Exactly. They didn't get married. Let's just say that. I mean, but rightfully so, because
Yeah.
they want two very different things. So
Yeah.
it's like, I wish people just had these conversations earlier, as opposed to just being in my seat having these conversations, because now I'm sparking these conversations. So I will say, shameless plug, part of the Prenup Queen, we have these like little decks called, we call them money card decks, but
Hmm.
because people, we're trying to push, and a lot of influencers on social media are trying to push couples to have financial discussions like on a weekly basis, like, or at least a monthly basis at the least. Um, but a lot of people like don't know what kind of conversations to have. So as a divorce attorney, I'm thinking they should know A, they should know B, C, D, they should know all these things about their person before they get married. So
Yeah.
I created a little money deck card, and just selling those or giving those out so that people can, solidify their marriage. I got completely off track. If
No,
you had
that was a
asked
good track. That was a very good track because you're making me think about like I've again, you know what, I study reality TV a lot.
mm-hmm.
Because I feel like that's when we get. I know sometimes it's scripted, but I really feel like we get into the nitty gritties of human psyche from reality TV, and also just generally just from like I, I study people a lot, and
Right.
through stories and stuff. So one of the things that people don't talk about enough, as you're saying, is their money philosophies, and about okay, are you rigid with how much you spend? Like, are you a saver? Are you always in survival mode when it comes to you and your money?
Exactly.
Or are you on the other side? Are you I don't care, money come, money go. I spend my money. I'm like and the funny thing is, those two people end up always finding each other. It's never
Yep.
like money come, money go, and there's two people who feel the same way. Like it's always so weird. It's always like
Uh-huh.
it's never you're never on the same money philosophy. If I want to say, it's always like kind of opposite. From
Mm-hmm.
maybe you can tell me more. Maybe you can confirm or deny that in terms of like what you've seen with couples. Like, are they usually like in the same money philosophy type, or
No,
it's usually like
no. And I think I mean, there's that saying, opposites attract.
yeah.
Um, because usually the person who's like money comes, money goes is the person who should be saving a little bit better. And then you have a penny pincher who it's like, okay, you can loosen like the purse strings a little bit, you know? And you would hope they'd find some type of like middle ground, but it's usually the people who are just like extreme, like just on extreme ends, and they just cannot even comprehend the other person's thoughts or their
Hmm.
perspective around money, which is why there ends up being such an issue. But I think there's pros and cons to both. And that's something
Yeah.
like me personally, I'm trying to learn, especially being in like survival mode, being in it, just the way I grew up. That's just how it's always been. And so me trying to therapy helps me with this, but me trying to let go a little bit and understand that maybe I should think like there's plenty of money out here in the world for all of us. And it's an
Yeah.
abundance mindset instead of I have to hold on to every little penny that comes in, you know?
Yeah, there's some people who just love to see their money stack up in their bank account. They're like, man, I just love stacking up those thousands. And then it's like, you have enough money to take yourself on vacation. And like, why would I take myself on vacation? That's a waste of money.
Yeah.
And
And
it's
then
like,
those are the people that have like one ply tissue at home. And I'm like,
exactly.
dude, like, dude.
Exactly. It's always like it's the extremes. And there's some people, especially like when you're dating, there's some people who say, I can't tell you about all my finances until we're married. A lot of
Yeah.
people think that way, especially like I'm trying to think about in my culture and like in Zimbabwe and Shona culture. As a man, you don't really like say, oh, this is what I got.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really tell how much you have because maybe, and I know a lot of people maybe come from like wealthy families who say, I want the person to marry me for me and not for my money. So I'm not going
Right.
to tell you how much we have until we're married. And then I'll let you know what we got.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I know that those are kind of some of the mentalities. And some women, tread culture right now will say, listen, I've met some of my friends are like, I just want to be aloof. I don't care. As long as the bills are paid, I'm in the house. I'm chilling. I don't want to know how much this costs. As long as it's paid for, I'm just here to be me. I'm chilling. There are
Right.
people out there like that, and it's like, okay, So I don't know if you've encountered that, but it's always so fascinating to me people's philosophies when it comes to, and it's really dangerous too, right? Because if that guy leaves you,
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly. I represent so many they're not even stay-at-home parents. They're just stay-at-homes. Like they just stay at home. That's all they
hmm
do. And they're going through a divorce and it's like they still don't want to work. They don't want to go back out there and start working. And so they're in the worst spot financially. Like for example, I have this client, the sweetest though, the sweetest, but she it's a long-term relationship. I'm talking like 25 plus years long-term relationship.
wow,
Hasn't worked. Um and now they're going through a divorce and he locked her out of all the accounts.
mm,
Also went and sold her car. Like like he just completely became someone unrecognizable to her cuz never in a million years would she think he would ever do something like that.
yeah,
Um, and now she's like scrambling because she doesn't know how she's gonna pay for anything. And
hmm
so, how does she pay for an attorney? How does she pay her bills? How does she? It, it's a mess. It is a mess, and she doesn't want to go back to work. You would think she could just go get a job real quick, like
yeah.
something, but she doesn't want to.
And that's, yeah, it really be like that. It really be, and I'm surrounded by a lot of my friends who say it's very, very important for women to have their own bank account, especially when you're married. Like, have your own something so that have an exit plan, just in
Hmm.
case. Just put some money, even if you don't want to work. Just married to a millionaire, just have something of your own where like you can put money into it, just in case something happens. Because you never want to. I've heard too many stories,
Yep.
even like family members, like, or whatever the case, where like, especially in African contexts, where now the man is, listen, I'm leaving you, and it's like, I'm taking everything I got, and you just left with nothing. And they usually leave you with the kids too. So something like they take the kids with them. It's like, no, I'm gonna leave you with the kids though. And it's like,
Hmm.
how do you even? So it's really sad stories like that. And so when I speak to people, I always like try and say, what, it's really important to both have something. Like, I support
Right.
that because, yeah, you never want to be in a position where you're left with nothing. Especially
Exactly.
25 years out of the workforce is, where'd you even start?
Right. And she's starting from the bottom,
Yeah.
and like, yeah, she thought she was gonna. I mean, we're gonna get her a lot of money. He makes bukus of money. They have tons of assets,
Okay.
and we're gonna get that for her. But it's just like in this moment, in this waiting period until we get like a final court order, it's she feels like she has nothing. She's housing insecure, food insecure, literally has nothing.
Yeah, that's a really unfortunate. So, I mean, you know, we've covered a lot here, but again, maybe I'm just again, I can't get this out of my head. So, out of all these conversations that you've had and all these people you've met, what is it that has made you so jaded to just like? I would think that because you've been in, you now kind of know what it is that works, you know what
Mhm.
you're looking for, you know what, you know, if you have these conversations all the time, it's like maybe when I guess people go out on dates, these are kind of the questions you hit them with first 2 3 dates, like, all right, cool, what you think about this, what you think about that, what you think about this, check check
Yeah.
check, cool, now we can, maybe we can go somewhere. So what is
Mhm.
it, it sounds like you've kind of gone the other end, or like, you know what, it's this is what is it, yeah, I'm curious what your thought process has been with that.
So I mean, I say I'm in the dating scene. I have a boyfriend, and I will say the first few dates, I ask questions. I don't ask like, "How much money do you have? How much money do you make?"
Yeah,
Granted, he's military, so I can Google. I know his rank. I know how long he's been in. I can figure out how much he makes, right?
yeah.
But like, I don't ask how much you have sitting in your bank account. I don't ask how much is sitting in his retirement account. I don't ask those types of questions yet.
Okay.
I ask questions more so like, one, do you want to have kids? Two, what type of lifestyle? I mean, I can see his lifestyle too, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
like, is this the type of lifestyle you can maintain? Because you're about to bring me up a level, so I just want to make sure this is gonna be maintainable, right?
Yeah.
Or it's I ask questions like, what do you want like in life, like what type of, ask him what type of woman he wants, because I personally do want to be a stay-at-home parent, and this is why I go hard for stay-at-home parents, but I just go about it differently. So I will never
Mm-hmm.
be 100% dependent on him. I have my own business. I'm trying to stack my coins, trying to figure out passive income so I can still maintain some type of financial independence separate from him.
Yeah.
But I ask questions like, what does he expect from me? What does he envision our life to look like? How many kids are we going to have? Where does he want to eventually live? Do we stay in San Diego? Does he want to go back to where he's from? Like, just tell me what he's envisioning. So that
Mm-hmm.
way I can see if what I want aligns with what he wants. Because if
Yeah.
it doesn't align, it's not going to work. And I'm not here to waste his time. I don't want him wasting my time, because you only get one life to live, right? So
Exactly.
I tend to ask open ended questions like that so he
Mm-hmm.
can give me his answer and I can make sure like we're on the same page moving forward. But I will eventually find out and ask like, all right, well, do you have a savings? How do you view investing? Do you actually believe in investing? Um, Things of that nature. When are you going to retire? Are you intending to retire? Um, Little things like that. So the reason to answer your other question, my reason for being jaded is just divorce. Watching these people go through a divorce, watching these people shred each other to like to bits and pieces,
Yeah.
and I just can't help but think like there was a moment in time where y'all were like in the honeymoon phase, when y'all were head over heels for one another. And now it's like a full 180 and y'all can't stand each other. Um,
Mm.
so it just makes me like a little nervous to get into a relationship, especially with the wrong person.
Oh yeah.
Um, because I'm watching how it's affecting my clients mentally, physically, spiritually, like all around. And I'm just like, I need to take finding my person serious because I'm not trying to end up in the same situation my clients is in.
Yeah. No, I that's very, very true because I mean at the end of the day, who you marry dictates where your life goes. You know,
Yes.
it really it's so, and I would wish that more people, I think now marriage is kind of like, I don't know, not I don't know if people take it as serious anymore. I
I
think
know.
it's like I you know what, I feel good about you. I feel good about you too. Let's just go and, you know, this is why I still respect like the African culture a
Hmm.
lot, because for us, like for me, when what my process, like what the process is, you have to, once you say okay, I want to get married, you reach out to like the wife's aunt, right? Hey, this is what I'm planning to do.
Hmm.
Cool. Then there's a process. Then at some point, eventually, it gets to the parents, and then at some point, you have to do like the whole dowry thing. Go to the parents' family. You
Oh,
present. You have to give them like, okay, the cows. It's a negotiation about, okay, just so they can see if you're serious. Like, okay, how
right.
much? do you want to, and there's a conversation that happens, and eventually that's when it's like, all right, we've come to an agreement. Cool. Now, and so, and that whole process is more for like familial building, so that for you yourself, that the whole purpose is not to say, oh, this is how much your daughter costs, but it's more to say, I'm respecting where my daughter came from. I'm respecting where
Right.
this person about to marry came from. She has a whole family. So it's just like, if I divorce you, it's just you. It's not, no, I'm separating myself from you and your entire family.
Right.
There's a lot more at stake.
Yes. More consequences.
More
Yes.
yeah. So that's why I really appreciate that process, because for you to finally say, hey, you know what, I'm done with you. I'm good. It's like there's so much else that comes with that. That
Yeah.
it's not just a flippant choice you just make, because
Exactly.
yeah. So
Yeah. We do.
I love it.
I agree. I agree. I feel like marriage isn't as sacred as it used to be. I feel like it's super easy to get into. It is difficult to get out, but for the slightest things, people will peace out. And it's not even just like, obviously, if there's domestic violence, done. If there's, I'm big on if there's infidelity, done.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think that marriage just isn't as sacred as it used to be. Um, but people don't understand the consequences of marrying the wrong person. So, yeah, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this was really a very educational episode. Final word on this: prenups are so important. Maybe I'll let you like just your final little why prenups are as important as they are and why people should get them. Like maybe I'll let you, just say your final little
Yeah, your
sentence.
future is important. Your future is just as important as your spouse's, your future spouse's. So a prenup is just protecting your future. If you tend to have kids, protecting their futures, and just strengthening marriages as well, because we're going to foster certain types of discussions. So it's just a way for us to make sure we are going to marry someone who is properly aligned with our own goals and dreams. So everyone should get a prenup.
Everybody should get a prenup. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your wealth of knowledge. It's and again, for people who want to learn more about you on Instagram, you go by the Prenup Queen.
Yes.
So and I mean, I'll tag you when I share like the little tidbits and stuff, so that people can have access to the information that you share online and stuff. So I'll also have that on there. But thank you so much for being here, and listeners, if I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've learned something from this. Please reach out to her if you have any questions.
Yeah.
So with that, I will say peace out, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Bye.